Hello everyone, I hope everyone had a wonderful week. I'm gonna try to say a short piece over here on this week's Parsha. Quite a fascinating one. And maybe hopefully we'll get an understanding of the general Indian, but certainly we will hopefully be able to get an insight that could serve the function of Torah, which is to improve our lives drastically, and offering us an insight that will allow us to change our perspectives such that we will be able to have a more pleasurable and fulfilling life as per God's desire for all creation. So it says in this week's parsha that, and this is the famous, that Yaakov was sending Malachim, and he's scared to Machanos. He's scared about Esau coming, and so he is. It says over here that so he takes all of his possessions, and he's mavir them in the nachal. He takes them over the gesher, over the water. So Rashi says, so that's what Rashi explains what this is talking about. This is what Yaakov is doing. And then it says, Yaakov levado, and Yaakov is left on his own. And this is the famous pasuk, the song, Vaser Yaakov, etc. And by Vaser Yaakov, Rashi says, according to Gemara Chulin, that it's talking about it's Shachach Pachim Ketanim. Yaakov forgot the Pachim Ketanim v'Chazer Aleichem, and now he went and he was Chazer on them. So that is Chulin Tzadi Aleph. Now in that Gemara in Chulin Tzadi Aleph, it's probably there. I don't know 100% if it's there or not. Let's see. The Gemara says something which is extremely, extremely fascinating, and could very well be a opening to the understanding of what's going on in the Parsha. And the Gemara says the following thing. The Gemara says that the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says that, let's see. So I think, okay, here we go. Yeah, this is the Gemara. So, Chulin Tzadi my base, just so you can see it, because it's a bit of a surprising thing. So it says like this. Vaser Yaakov levado, Amar Blazer, Shenishtayer al Pachim Ketanim. That he was left on small pachim, small little jugs of oil. Mikan tzadikim. From here you see that for righteous people, for tzadikim, shechaviv aleim amayim yesim migufa, that their mammon, their property, their possessions, their money, is chaviv to them. It's more dear to them than their bodies. V'kol kach lama. And why is this so? I mean, the Gemara is asking why are their bodies, why is their mammon more dear to them than their bodies? So the Gemara says because she'ain plashtim midem begezel, because they don't take their hand, and they don't steal. So this is what the Gemara learns out from the idea from the pasuk that we just said that that Yaakov did. And Rashi says all the important things that, and the cattle kvar havirinus nachal yabok, you already put them over the nachal. So his big lavir. So in other words, Yaakov had already taken everything that was important, and now all that was left over was some small jugs. And there's other famous midrashim which say that these essentially are the jugs of, they refer to the nearest of Hanukkah, because the So really, we want to understand. Simply speaking, we would like to know what is this idea is seemingly very perplexing because when we I'm showing it to you inside. It's not something I'm making up. You can see it right here in front of you. So when we think about tzaddikim, we don't think about people who we don't even think in our minds when we say that someone is a tzaddik. We picture a gadol or something. We see someone, he doesn't care about gashmius. He doesn't care about physicality. He's just learning all day. He has no dealings in gashmius, and he's just some holy parish person who has no connection to the physical world whatsoever. That's what we think in our minds. Yet, come along Chazal, come along the Gemara, and tell us that we have a preconceived notion of what righteousness is, and our preconceived notion is incorrect. And not only is it incorrect, meaning that tzaddikim do care about their physical possessions, but according to this Gemara, tzaddikim care about their physical possessions more than their own bodies. This is what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is doing it out from Yaakov that he stayed on the other side of the edge, even though it got dark and it was nighttime, and anyone could have come out of nowhere. Still, Yaakov went back to the Pahal Gitan. So we have to understand in what way our preconceived notion is wrong, and what is the explanation of how to correctly conceive of what it means to be a tzaddik. And then we have also, obviously, this has to provide for us an insight on how, as righteous Jews, how are we meant to relate to physicality and to possessions, because obviously this is what it's speaking about. So that's the second thing that we have to learn from this. And then we also need to understand that it's not a coincidence that when Yaakov goes back or is left over for these Pachim Ketanim, so this is when he is ne'evak with the Sarah Shel Esav. So meaning, when we say that that Yaakov is fighting with the Sarah Shel Esav, we are saying essentially that it has to integrally do. It's inherently tied to this idea that the relationship that Yaakov had to physicality as a tzaddik, that relationship directly was the thing which put him in conflict with Sarah Shel Esav. So that when he stayed over for the Pachim Ketanim, that was an act of battle with that is where and when the Malach, the Sar of Esav, chose to now go ahead and fight him, and we have to understand why that is. That's not a coincidence. It's not, it's a coincidence. It happens to be that tzaddikim like their mama more than their own bodies, and it happens to be that when we saw that concept at play by Yaakov, that's when the Sar happened to have decided to come and fight him. No. That's not a coincidence. That's how gufa, that's a cheftza of what's going on. We have to understand why. So, those are things we have to understand. And the other thing that we have to understand, and maybe we'll speak about this more in addition in the next week's parsha, but most people don't realize that the victory of Hanukkah really, in essence, was not a victory of physicality at all. It wasn't a physical victory. And not only was it not a physical victory, the main victory of Hanukkah was not really over the Greeks, the Yavanim themselves, but it was much more a victory in terms of the idea that Klal Yisrael, in contrast to the Greeks, gained a moral clarity within themselves such that they were able to overcome the Greeks. And this can be seen very vividly throughout the entire nusach of the Tefillah, where we say Masarta Gibarim Biad Chalashim Tzadikim Yerushalayim Biad Tzadikim, etc., Rabim Biad Ma'atim. All these dynamics, these contrasts, are clear indications that the physicality ceased to play a role due to the fact that moral clarity was gained. And that is because of the fact that in the times of the Greeks, many of the Jewish people were Hellenized, and they lost moral clarity on what it means to be Jewish. And that moral clarity that was returned is bought out by the Chashmonaim, and that is what led directly to their victory. Their victory was an expression of the Matthias of the clarity that they gained. So we have to understand now also, if he's referring to Tachim Ketanim, how does this Indian of the relationship with physicality and Mammon, how does that tie into what Hanukkah is coming to teach us as well? So those are the underlying themes. And there's something over here which I think is worth pointing out. I really just noticed this, but in the pasuk, Rashi says something fascinating. So the pasuk says, "Vayivaser Yaakov levado," and then it says, "Vayavik ish imo aloshava." So what does this word mean? Vayavik. So Menachem Perish Reis Aper Loshen Avak. So it has to do with dirt that is Shirmalam Afer Bragleima Dein Yidon. And Rashi says something else, and we have to understand when Rashi is giving pshat, it's not Rashi is nothing is in a vacuum. So if Rashi gives pshat in a word based off how he understands Torah, it now changes the entire theme, and he knows that it's changing the entire theme because he understands that when he's giving pshat in the pasuk, it has to fit into the rest of the pasuk, into the rest of the inyan. So it's inherent in the pshat, its implication. So Rashi says, "V'linira shu lashon v'yiskasher," that it's a lashon of tying, v'lashon aramihu, basar daviku beiv avik lemei v'lashon aniva. So shekein derech shnayim shemes atzman hapelas re'eu, when two people are trying to knock each other over, shechoiv koiv, they hug each other, v'ivke bezra'isa, when they hold each other in their zroim, in their arms. So Rashi's bringing that in not as a contradiction, but as an additional factor in the pshat. Now, the main chiddush and the main kind of fascinating idea which comes out of this pshat of Vayavik, which I don't know why I never picked on it before, is that Rashi essentially is saying that when the pasuk is telling you that Vayavik ish imai, the pasuk is actually saying that they were connected to each other. It's not meaning it's a fact that they were fighting, but when the pasuk says Vayavik, the Vayavik part of it is the fact that they actually were connected to each other, not that they were trying to overcome one another, or the fact that they were trying to, kill or damage each other. So that really is something which is very, very hard to understand, simply speaking, which is that if Vayavik means that they were connected to each other, Lashon Kesher, what does that imply? What does that mean? The pasuk is pointing out that Yaakov was tied to Lashon Aniva, he was tied to the Shas La'isa. That seems to imply a level of chibur, which is a connection. And what sense does that make? That Yaakov was connected to the Shas La'isa. How does that make sense? So we're going to start off, and we're going to essentially speak out the following idea. And that is, and we have discussed this in the past, and that is that there is two essential ways in which a person can relate to physicality. And when I say essential ways that he could relate, what I really mean is two modes of orientation towards them. And those are the way that someone orients himself towards something is based off what he wants to get from the thing that he's orienting himself towards. So essentially, there is the Russia's way of orienting, and we're gonna classify, and we're gonna say that the way that Russia relates to physicality is that a Russia, in fact, attempts to use physicality as a means of justifying self. That is the simplest understanding. What Russia does is that this is Esav and Edom, this is Indian, this is very, very the Indian. Edom, America, and Goyim define themselves by the manner in which and the quantity of which they consume. Meaning that there is self and there is consumption of physicality, and in the Goy's world, in the Esav's world, self is defined by quantity of consumption. And in that scenario, it's impossible to ever be satisfied, because if you are trying to fill a vacuum which requires an entirely different entirely different quality of thing, and you try to fill it up with a quantity of something of lower quality, it never works, because obviously it's not about the quantity. It's about the fact that the quality of the thing which you're trying to use to fill the vacuum is not, it just doesn't work. So when someone has an identity and he has a self, that self needs to be filled with permanent, lasting manners of pleasure and self-expression that will give satisfaction to the need for that pleasure and satisfaction. And since self is a everlasting thing, and the neshama is an everlasting thing, um, it requires the level of output, and it requires giving and being the basis of, and doing mitzvos and relating to other people in a deep way, helping them, etc. The pleasures that you get from being the giver is much higher quality level of pleasure than you do from being the taker, and that is the quality of pleasure that's required for one's neshama, for one's identity. And this is brought out when Esav and Yaakov actually meet, and Esav says Yeshli Rav, and Yaakov says Yeshli Yechanani Elokim Yeshli Chol. Right? One says I have a lot, one says I have Chol. So Esav has so much, maybe even more than Yaakov has, but he doesn't. And for him, it's only a lot. Can't be he has everything, because if you define yourself by how much you have, and the self is is something which exists forever and is much deeper than the physical realm, so then you can never feel satisfied, and therefore you can never have kol, because now of course you can't have kol because you're never satisfied, because you're trying to fill, you're trying to fill up something which it's like filling up a car with a wrong type of gas. It's just no shaykhs. The neshama doesn't take physical consumption as fuel for itself. What we do is we temporarily distract ourselves many times over, and for some people it leads to depression. Depending on how sensitive you are to neshama. But if someone is not doing the quality of things that the neshama requires for its satisfaction, ultimately you can go from distraction to distraction, from car to car, to house, to girl, whatever it is. It ultimately it won't fill the void, and that person, could distract himself. The person could distract themselves until they die, but that's just the nebach. So the main point is that therefore it has to be rough. Whereas Yaakov says kol, because kol means that this is the second way of relating to physicality, and this is the ikar idea over here, which is that you don't relate to physicality as a mode of attempt to justify self or to define self-success or self-satisfaction. Rather, the manner in which you relate to physicality is that it is to be used as a expression of the inner reality of what I already am. So in other words, Yaakov Avinu has a identity, he has a self, he has a family, he has children, he has a relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu, has a relationship with his wives, has a relationship with everything, and that gives him an identity. And now he uses external things to express his identity, and therefore those things that he uses to express and to further his identity become cheftas of essentially hemshech of the reality of what he is, and they represent the reality of what he is in a manner which is further than his immediate body. And this is really the basic yesod of how tzaddikim are meant to relate to physicality, which is that if someone is a tzaddik, it means that he is totally satisfied with the reality of his self, and when he uses physicality, he's using it physicality is an expression of him, as opposed to something he's trying to use to get a sense of self in the first place. And therefore, it is an additional thing which is being used for the agenda of Hakadosh Baruch Hu in the world, and therefore it itself has a greater sense of chavivas to him than his own guf. Because a person's own guf is obviously it's much easier for a person's own guf to be an expression of what he feels that he is than something else, because something is external to him, and yet it's tied to his sense of self-expression. That is a greater level, and in Mela you have more chavivas for it than the reality of your own guf. And this is the pshat of what it means to begazel, because if you don't steal, stealing essentially is just a mechanism of understanding that you now are taking something which is somebody else's and you're making it yours, which essentially means that you don't have your own identity. You have to steal and take something which is other people's. And since you're taking something which is other people's and you're making that part of you, then Mela, you see that you don't have any independent, real sense of identity, and therefore you therefore use physicality as a manner in which you try to justify your sense of self, not as an expression of that sense of self. And Remela, that is the pshat why it says that tzadikim chavivin aleim amoinam yaisim migufa. Okay.